Hey mates, it's me Riz, doing reaction on the channel again. This is World War II by Oversimplified Part 2. Now, I'll be honest, the first part, I had a lot of questions about it, but I yet to get. I wasn't super invested about it, but I still wanted the questions. I mean, this was just the beginning of the war, and it was more focused about Europe. It didn't focus. I thought it was going to focus more on a few outside of Europe. I mean, sure, they also mentioned Japan and its conquer of China, and I wanted to focus more on when Australia gets into the war. I mean, technically, they were in the war at the start. They were in Africa. Then they were in areas like in Singapore, in the British colonized areas of China. And yeah, let us continue with the video and let's see what happens. Anyway, let's start.
So what else is happening? Well, when I said Britain was all alone, that wasn't entirely true. Many Commonwealth nations and other allied...
Hey, wait. Okay. Oh. You got India, you got Australia, you got New Zealand, you got... That does not seem right. But... What? It's a bit of a fuck up. And then you got South Africa.
Colonies had joined the war in Britain's support.
What?
They would play a key role through...
Whoops, sorry, Canada. Oh my goodness. Okay, you know what? I think they started when they did all this big bit, they accidentally did it and then someone had to edit it real quick and just slide it in.
Throughout the war, particularly in the African and Italian campaigns. On the Axis side, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Defensive Tripartite Pact, bringing their military alliance even closer together.
Okay, here's a question. Okay, already question. You know me, I ask questions. Some of you answer my questions in the comments. So, what was the relationship with Germany, Italy, and Japan? What would it be on a... I gotta get, like, it's based on by government, but what would be the relationship between soldier to soldier? Because that would be something, would be an interesting movie. Like, oh my goodness, I think there might have been a movie about it, but I don't know. Like, if there's a movie between the relationship between, or like when there's interaction between, like, say, Japan and Germany, I'll be interested in. Also, yeah, I've seen some in previous comments. I've seen people putting movies, and I have seen them, and and shit. And for some reason, I cannot stop thinking about the Patriot. It's pretty much. I think there's one scene that pretty much just jumped the shark. That everything was jumping the shark, but there was just one that that was like jumping you're jumping the biggest shark, or the biggest jumping the biggest shark ever. What was it? It was using using a flag as a spear to stop the big villain charging from the hero guy. I can't remember the name, sorry. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. The Soviet Union's war against Finland should have been an easy victory, but it became a humiliating struggle, and their military ineptitude was put on full display. In the end, they did force the Finns to sue for peace. Then, they continued their honorable campaign of pushing around much smaller countries by annexing the Baltic states and part of northern Romania. France's colonies in equatorial Africa were like, heck no, we aren't going to join the Germans.
Heck no, Felix, in reference to joining the Heckim
And they all
Germans.
pledged their allegiance to free France, except for Gabon, which had to be taken by military force. The Allies also tried to capture the strategic port of Dakar, but that ended in failure. Mussolini had seen Hitler's successes, and he thought now it was Italy's time to shine, so he tried to take British Somaliland, and that went pretty well. Then he tried to take Egypt, and that went less well. Then he tried to take Greece, and that went really badly. Churchill began referring to Italy as Europe's soft underbelly.
Oh! Okay. Based on based on the research when I was looking, when I had a look at why was Italy very incompetent. Now, aside from resources, it kind of the problem with Italy was that its officers were pretty bad. Like their soldiers were good, you know, like any typical like well-trained soldiers, but they were terrible at they had terrible officers, or not as good officers to say the least. And this is the kind of same problem with Germany. They had really well-trained soldiers, but they also had well-trained officers. But the problem is that once you, like say, capture the officer or shoot the officer, the Germans kind of they're not that very well effective. And I don't know if this is, I think this might have been just a European thing as well, but Germany had the worst of it by far. Oh, in terms that if the officer was like taken prisoner, then all the rest of the soldiers might have been taken prisoners. But that depending on whether it was on the soldier itself. SS or Gestapo soldiers, the guys in black uniforms, would not have surrendered, or I don't think any European would accept their surrender, because they were not. I don't want to mention it, or how should I put this? They pretty much didn't. They pretty much hated. You know what? I think you could take a guess what they did. Anyway, and continue.
He began favoring a military
also
campaign
Italian
from the
tanks were
south
really,
and started sending British troops
pretty
to
bad.
Greece. All of this had Hitler pretty concerned.
And also, I think a few Australian units just took the Italian tanks, which they kind of look like just half tracks or something. I don't know.
And he moved to protect his southern flank. He had been getting friendly with Hungary and twisted their arm into signing the Tripartite Pact and joining the Axis powers. Romania was also eager to join for protection against the Soviet Union. The Tripartite Pact was designed to prevent any other countries from deciding to join the Allies, specifically Britain's old ally, the pesky United States of America. When war first broke out, American public opinion was strongly against joining in. In 1940, there was an election. The Republican candidate said, "I will not send any young Americans to die in Europe." And sitting President Franklin D. Roosevelt said, "I will also not send any young Americans to die in Europe. Unless I have to, then I might."
Hey, have you ever noticed that America, for all intents and purposes, like in both world wars, they were never the first ones to get involved in any war? Like no one ever thinks that they always praise that America always at like all the praise they get for World War II, let them get praise, but for World War One, they're kind of a dick about that, or kind of had a hand in spreading a huge plague among American soldiers, and would have been best if they started to go to war in the first place when they were called upon. Like, what was it, 19 something? I don't know. Continue.
And Roosevelt won. Churchill asked him to join the war, but Roosevelt said, "No can do, Winston, but you know what? Here, have some weapons."
I think there's a video that puts more detail on what was going on with the trading between the US and UK and the colonies. Though I'll not get to that here. Okay.
America began supplying the Allies with food and munitions, but there was one problem. German U-boats were sinking thousands of Allied supply ships in the Atlantic, including American ones. If the Germans could sever Britain's supply line, the UK would starve. Throughout the war, the Allies had to come up with better technology to fight the U-boats. Improved radar, aircraft with longer range, better weaponry and convoy tactics. At one point, a man even called a meeting and said, "Pykrete, you take some wood, you take some ice, you put them together, you get pykrete." And then he pulled out a gun and shot some wood and it shattered. And then he shot some pykrete and the bullet ricocheted off it and hit someone else in the conference room. And then they...
Oh yeah. What's interesting with World War II, a lot of technologies that were used today, or was used in World War II, were stepping stones to a lot of technologies that we use today. And what was weird is that World War II kind of had some of the most craziest technologies that people were trying to make. Some involved it. Among with this, the Nazis tried to make a wind cannon, basically a cannon that pretty much makes a whirlwind or a cyclone. Basically, their way of trying to create a natural disaster. Now, on the Allied side, the Americans made, I think it was the Americans that made a bomb that pretty much had the same effect of creating an earthquake by some bomb that just jams down into the ground and then explodes and shifts the tectonic plates. And really, that was overdone by the nuclear bomb. Also, then there was also the fire bombs and also the bat bombs, which it was a bunch of bats just set off with incendiaries, which was used on Japan. Wait, the earthquake bomb. I think as I remember, I think the earthquake bomb was used to disrupt a bridge or some kind of aqueducts railway system. Oh, I don't know. It looks like a column that had a bridge, shook it around and just destroyed it. Oh my goodness! And then there was there's a whole bunch of other inventions that were crazy back then, but I'm trying to remember of I don't know. There were a few other things like there's always like the better tanks, better vehicles, jeeps and such, and then weapons like Germany kind of started making the precursor to an assault rifle, but there was one also I think maybe technically that there was kind of vehicles that were kind of pimped out with bulletproof stuff and with machine guns. I think there was like a motorcycle that just had an impracticality of having a machine gun on the side with bulletproof glass in front. It's people were trying to invent stuff and some impracticality was happening.
They tried to make a Pykrete aircraft carrier, but that idea was scrapped because that's a really dumb idea. In the end, Alan Turing and his team of codebreakers cracked Germany's Enigma code, and the U-boats gradually became less and less of a threat. Back in Africa, Britain decided to push Italy out of Egypt. Hey, that was pretty easy, so they kept going. Hitler realized he was going to have to finally step in and do something. He went to Bulgaria and Yugoslavia and said, "Hey, I'm going to move troops through you to get to Greece, so either join us or, be invaded." Bulgaria opted to join them. Yugoslavia opted to be invaded. Then Greece finally fell to the joint German-Italian invasion. The British had moved troops from North Africa to fight in Greece, which helped Rommel and his tank divisions push the British back to Egypt. And they could have kept going, but a small, mostly Australian force held out under siege for 8 months in Tobruk, denying the Germans a strategic port city and disrupting their supply line. Despite having some success in the Middle East, the British didn't seem like any real threat for now. Hey, Soviet Union, look out! With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history.
And biggest mistake ever in military history. Okay. And all fairness is that problem was this had to do with this begs the question, like there's always the what if the German army had got winter clothes? What if they got the necessary resources to them? What if they could have invaded through Russia through the season or before when winter came? There's a lot of things to talk about from this, but it makes for a good what if scenario, but I don't think it maybe have worked it in practice. a lot of factors happen. A lot of things tip the scales in war, maybe slightly, but not enough. But anyway, let's wait. I just realized, is the Soviet flag not correct? It looks what that bit here doesn't have the sickle. It looks like some kind of pickle banana type thing, a moon, crescent moon. Anyone notice that?
Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand, and the Soviets didn't stand a chance.
Yeah, Stalin, when he heard the news, he was stressed, like how could he have done this, and then went back to his office bed or something, and then just, I don't know, I think maybe he had panic attacks or something, or just like, he just couldn't believe it, and then after what was I don't know, a day or so, he just came and then started get the troops ready and all the other stuff to prepare or get ready to fight for the Germans.
Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders came to him and said, "Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring?" "No, keep going. But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles." "That's fine. Keep going."
Did he literally say that? No, seriously, did he literally say that? I mean, if I remember that Germany did started started learning on how to improve their tanks and such during this time, like when Russia was building those T-34s, Germany had to take research on the tanks, and it involves a bit of trigonometry. That's the right word for it, because if you slope the armor, and if a projectile gets fired upon it, it could result into a higher density of a tank and could just ricochet off. But no. This is wait. This is a bit further on.
We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift. Perfectly normal. Keep going. Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing.
Oh my goodness. You shouldn't wear helmets during the winter. They didn't. I don't think a lot wore helmets in the winter. They wore some type of winter clothing, but your skull would have been frozen onto that helmet. Jeez.
Supplies, because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Germany's victories were staggering, and Japan was eager not to miss the victory bus. Their war in China had come to a standstill, but they wanted to keep expanding their sphere of influence and getting those sweet, sweet raw materials. They began making plans to expand southward, but there was a problem. Southeast Asia was heavily colonized by America and Great Britain.
Yep, and then there's the success of Australia taking over the parts of New Guinea in World War One, or just holding on to it while Britain does all this. I mean, if flags here, then it's just part of the Australian territory. Wait a minute. Shouldn't we technically have the red ensign? Kind of. I mean, it's not the. Okay.
It was also full of ocean. Ocean meant naval combat, and there was no way the Japanese Navy could stand up to the US and the UK. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice if we could destroy their navies before we begin our conquest? And so it was. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese launched a surprise air raid on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage. They also attacked British
back up
on the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and inflicted a huge amount of damage.
21 ships sunk or damaged, hundreds of aircraft damaged or destroyed. No, no
They also
I
attacked
don't
British
have
colonies in
comments.
Southeast Asia. Roosevelt had no choice but to declare war on Japan, and so did Churchill. Hitler then declared war on America, even though he totally didn't have to. The attack on Pearl Harbor seemed like a big Japanese victory, but they didn't attack any of the naval repair yards, fuel storage tanks, or the submarine base.
Oh. That might have been, that'd be nice to know that you should destroy the places where you repair or create. Huh. That would have been nice to know.
Meaning the Pacific Fleet would be up and running again pretty soon. In the meantime, though, the Japanese were able to begin their conquest. They took Guam, the Gilbert Islands, Wake Island, Hong Kong, and the Philippines. They forced Thailand to join them so they could march their troops through to Malaya. They swept through Singapore, North Borneo, the East Indies, New Guinea, the Solomons, and they were now threatening northern Australia.
And there's the bombing of Darwin, or the Battle of Darwin, depending on who you ask. And, hey, don't I have a video about that? Oh yes, I do have a video about that, right here. Please check it. This one kinda started the whole channel in the first place. Anyway, let's continue.
Australia and the borders of India. Japan's victory had been as staggering as the Germans, and it reinforced the Japanese idea that this was a divine war which they were destined to win. But their victories had been based on speed, not power, and power would eventually catch up with them. For now, though, in all occupied nations, the people suffered. Persecution, forced labor, harsh punishments for any who spoke out against their occupiers. In Europe, the Nazis were rounding up ethnic minorities and other unwanted groups and individuals. In particular, millions of Jewish people would suffer through the terrible events of the Holocaust. Brave resistance movements rose up in defiance of their invaders, while the people held...
Okay, I got it. Okay, here's a question. So, can anyone list all the resistant movements that were fighting for the Allies, or at least for their nation? Like, you had the Free French, you had the Polish, slash the Baltic resistance. Then you had some resistance in some other occupied German other German occupation places. Then there was what was it? There was one hold on. For some reason I'm thinking of a name called the Orange Resistance or Orange Army. Oh, I think the Orange. Damn it! Spell check. Orange. I don't know why I'm thinking Orange. The Orange Army, Brisbane Raw official threat. What? Okay, I think resistant. The Orange Resistant. Okay, there we go. Okay, military or of Wilhelm. Okay, the Dutch Resistance. Sorry, yeah, for some reason when you type in the Orange Resistance Army, it involves the Dutch Resistance. And you know, if there are resistance factions I did not mention, most likely I haven't, put them in the comments and give me like a little background on what they were doing.
Up for hope, and hope was coming. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready.
Okay. Here's something that something I always want to do or want to know, or just, you know, this is something I want to ask, or something that I kind of want to add on. Like, if someone makes or if Activision or whoever is going to make the next World War II game, if they focus on the Russian campaign, do every part of it, like every single battle they go through, because you kind of miss up, because like it always says that they keep on advancing, but what was the huge advances that Russia did from Stalingrad to Berlin? Because that part there I'm unaware of, but I'd just really like to know about that. And this is the same with a lot of places that a lot of campaigns in World War II. Sure, a lot of this is made by America. A lot of an American company that focuses on the American campaigns, and they do some small touches to the British campaign and the Russian campaign, but you never see a campaign for France, Australia, Canada. Well, okay, maybe Canada one game. Uh, one kind of campaignish with Poland or just the Poland resistance. Or what was I can't remember, but you know, there's so much there's so many battles that you never see in movies at all or in video games, which I think video games have a much better chance or better way to make it more entertaining. I'm just rambling.
Stalin
Let's just
gathered
keep
his
going.
new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the Sixth Army.
The tables have
Hitler's
turned.
commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, "No, you stay."
Did he actually say that? Or did he actually kind of said it like that? Or what was this at the point that Hitler was just going nuts? The more I see this, the more I want to know if that's an actual toy. Because look, I would be surprised if someone made a toy like that.
The entire Sixth Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe. Things also weren't looking too good for Hitler elsewhere. With America now in the war, Allied bombing over German cities reached devastating levels. In Africa, the British had pushed Rommel back again. Then they were pushed back again, and finally, after a decisive battle at El Alamein, and with American and British troops arriving in the west, the Germans and Italians were squeezed out of Africa. Japan was also already seeing its rapid success being turned around. They attempted to take the island of Midway, but the US Navy was ready for the attack, and they sank Japan's carrier. Actually, they sank a lot of them. It was a battle from which the Japanese Navy would never recover. British, Indian, and Chinese troops held the line in the harsh jungle terrain of Burma, and the Japanese suffered losses in the Solomon Islands and New Guinea. They began to realize they were not invincible.
Wait, hold on. Was this... Sorry, it's been a while since I've seen World War II from a map, but would this be technically called... This part here be the Kokoda Trail?
With the Axis out of Africa, the Allies had to decide their next move. Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. Alright, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly.
It is I, Luigi, come get her. Doesn't Antonio say? Okay, here's something that I got a question for. This is for American viewers and Italian viewers. Was there ever a time where America in World War II used people who were in prison, like specifically for Italy, anyone who was in jail that kind of joined the war for the Operation, what was this, Operation Husky? Or was it Operation Sicily? What was this operate? I can't remember. Was it called Operation Husky? Hold on. I think this was called, the invasion of Italy was Operation Husky. Hold on. Because did they ever use Italian at any Italians that were where they got to where if some Italians just got arrested or were potentially would be sent to jail, but were kind of conscripted to fight in the Italian campaign. I don't know if this is maybe it's just a pledge because I've heard because I'm not sure if it's true or not, but I don't operation us us yeah Husky Allied invasion of Sicily.
With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. Alright, said the Americans, let's do it our way as well. Germany had made itself a lot of enemies, and
well, okay. Let's see. Got it from Wikipedia. Let's see. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Free French Force, Polish Force, French Resistance, Australia, Free Belgium Force, Free Czechoslovakia Force, Free Greek Force, Free Luxembourg Force, Free Dutch Force, New Zealand, Free Norway Force, Danish sailors. What? Wikipedia screenshot because I'm lazy.
Millions of Allied troops had been gathering in England as factories worked around the clock producing the war material needed for a super crazy massacre the likes of which the world has never seen before invasion of Europe. The Germans knew an Allied invasion would come, but they didn't know where it would land. Thanks to Allied deception tactics, they thought there was a pretty good chance it would come at Calais. But the Allies were really going to land in Normandy because it was less fortified and the beaches were nicer. Under the careful...
Well, until Rumble came into for the defense of the French coastal line, and when he saw it, he freaking made sure that the thing was fortified. And that would be interesting. What would be the what if Rommel was not in charge of the coastal defense of France? That, my guess is that a lot less death and a huge spearhead of taking over the entire France would have been much easier to take. No, France would have been, might have been that France, you know what? I don't know. Some of your what ifs.
Planning of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the invasion that had been long in the making was just about ready to go. Just one thing was preventing the launch: the British weather. For a short time, everyone sat around waiting for a decent day, and then it came. On the night of June 5th, over 1,000 bombers took off and raided coastline defenses.
Actually, the bombings did very little. Maybe I'm mistaken, but they tried to get rid of most of the bunkers and stuff for an easy landing, but it did very little to the effect.
While paratroopers were dropped inland in a bit of a chaotic operation, tasked with sabotaging defenses and capturing key bridges to stop any German reinforcements from reaching the beaches.
And then a few hours, the Free French would do a lot of sabotage.
A huge number of shells at the German fortifications, and then the landings. The Americans at Utah and Omaha, the British at Golden Sword, and the Canadians at Juneau. It was a tremendous struggle with a great loss of life, particularly at Omaha, but the Allied troops captured the beaches and the landings were a success. Then they began their movements inland. They took the port of Cherbourg and the city of Caen. The Americans moved south to capture Brittany. Then, in a massive disaster for the Germans, British and Canadian troops from the north and Americans from the south trapped the German 7th Army in a near wipeout encircling movement. In August, Allied troops landed in the south of France to little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne. Paris landed in the south of France to
Hey, I'd like to know what this was about.
Little resistance. On one beach, all they found was a Frenchman handing out champagne.
Was that... what would this be? A landing or... This part might have had maybe a funny story.
Paris was liberated, and the Germans were pushed out of France as the Allies...
Oh, what? What? Oh, what? They're not going to talk about the liberation of Paris? Or the freaking, or the time where, we're gonna focus on France or Paris being liberated. Like the Free French Resistance were literally taking up arms to start liberating Paris street by street, and we're never gonna see a Paris liberation, aren't we? Not from a Call of Duty game. Like, yeah, no, they say that, yeah, we got one. It was Call of Duty World War II, but I think it could have been a lot better. So much potential.
Entered Belgium. In the Far East, the Allies started to push the Japanese out of Burma, as the Americans launched a two-pronged offensive in the Pacific. In the South, General MacArthur led the push to liberate the Philippines, while General Nimitz oversaw the brutal island-hopping campaign. American forces had to make hard-fought landing after hard-fought landing on fiercely defended small islands as they moved steadily towards the Japanese mainland. The Japanese believed that the greatest thing a person could do was to die in battle, and
that is true. It was the thought of victory or death, or it's a good. Jeez. I wonder if. Do you think the soldiers knew? Like, I think they knew eventually, like, they'd rather die than to surrender, but. Damn, it was something. You know what, continue.
The most dishonorable act was to surrender.
Yeah,
As a result, they fought ferociously to the very end. And the closer the Americans got to the mainland, the more ferocious the resistance became. In February 1945, the Americans captured the island of Iwo Jima, and an intense firebombing campaign of Japan's wooden cities began. The Allies suffered some setbacks trying to liberate the Netherlands, but they were making progress and were now threatening the industrial heartland of Germany. Hitler's health, both mentally and physically, was rapidly deteriorating. Things were looking bad, and he was desperate. He said, "We need to turn this thing around, and I have just the trick. Remember a few years back when we blitzkrieged through the Ardennes and trapped the Allied forces in Belgium? Well, I'm gonna do the exact same thing. Again." He gathered his forces and tried to pound them through the Ardennes. He used up the remainder of Germany's strength and resources, and he managed to create quite a nice bulge. He also trapped some American forces in the Belgian town of Bastogne. The Germans sent the trapped Americans a message saying surrender or be annihilated. When it was read out to the commanding officer, he said, "They want to surrender? No, sir, they want us to surrender." Nuts! And that's what they sent off as their official reply.
Okay, yeah, I know this bit.
General Patton's Third Army then managed to break the siege from the southwest, and the Germans were pushed back. Hitler's last-ditch attempt had failed, and what followed was a total collapse of the German forces. The Allies pushed into Germany from both sides. The Soviet Union took Warsaw.
Okay. I want to know what were the campaigns going on here, because I have no knowledge of all this on them going all the way through here.
And kept pushing to Berlin. In his bunker, Hitler realized all hope was lost. Berlin fell, and with it, Hitler's dreams of a great German empire. Two of the Axis nations had been knocked out, one to go. The Americans began their assault on Okinawa, the last island before they would reach the Japanese mainland. The desperate Japanese fought hard, launching kamikaze attacks on the US ships. The citizens of Okinawa suffered through the terrible fighting, but in 2 months, the island was captured. The Allies now had to make a choice. Either continue the devastating struggle up the Japanese mainland.
Oh my god. Yeah. This is like a terrible what-if scenario. Oh my goodness. Actually, last month I saw a documentary that Japan would so definitely carry through all this. Like, each person would go through fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting if all the allies went in and invade Japan. And yeah, they built the shit, like they built a whole bunch of bunkers, they built stuff to make sure it'd be just a national level guerrilla fighting that could go for so many years for it. But also, here's something interesting that with this documentary that I saw that I so want to shoot. I'm just gonna put down the documentary somewhere in the comments or description. But the shocking thing about it was that you saw both footage of both sides of the World War II footage from Japan's footage they put and the American footage, and it is quite shocking to see that on one end on one side the decimation of a battleship or all the fire that's going off in the Navy Sea, and also, but um, you know,
Or they could
it's
try
just
to
amazing.
coerce the Japanese into surrendering now. In July, the first successful atomic bomb test took place in New Mexico, and the destructive weapon was ready for use. America and the UK were also seeing the Soviet Union not so much liberating as occupying its captured territories, and so they wanted to put on a show of force. On
So
August
Truman.
6th, the A-bomb fell on Hiroshima.
Okay, there's so many people that debates on this that the Americans shouldn't have dropped the atomic bomb, but really, they didn't. America and all the other nations fighting Japan knew that Japan would not stop to take over Japan. They were willing to die. Like their entire empire would just simply, they were willing to Japan to just die because dying while fighting was a good way of dying. Or, yeah, I know what I said. So, and heck, shooting all those fire bombs would not work. So I'd say Hiroshima would, and I guess all the bombs with the, what was it, Fat Man and Little Boy, they were like giant wake up calls to say that better to not you know, I don't think any soldier for the both United States or the U.S. Army or even the Australian New Zealand Army, I no one holds it. I don't think none of them would have holded Truman or anyone who launched those bombs to hold it against them, because you kill a lot of people on the enemy side, or you kill a lot of men on both sides. And yeah, and this wasn't something involving a Soviet, wasn't something that scared Japan for something like that, because you know during this time there was a lot of there's like a lot of what ifs and what ifs and what ifs kind of situation, but the one that kind of sealed it after all these bombs was that the Soviets were now going to war with them, and it should have been better that to surrender to the Americans, because they had a better chance of, well, making sure that they survived, or at least Japan survived, and not be what all the at least like all the Baltic states and all the territories that Russia did become.
Then, on the 9th, Nagasaki.
They once
The
considered
cities were reduced to
bombing
rubble,
Kyoto.
and for the people living there, it was a terrible fate. But for the Allies, it achieved their main aim.
But they
In
didn't,
September, the
of
Emperor
Truman.
announced Japan's surrender, saying the war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. After 6 years,
Understatement.
war was finally
Anyway,
over.
geez.
The Allies occupied Japan for 8 years. The Emperor was allowed to keep his position, but General MacArthur made sure this picture was printed in the Japanese press.
Sorry. Like, I get... Sorry, it's just funny. It's that the Emperor made himself look all humble and stuff, good position of taking a photo, and General MacArthur just took it like he was all casual and stuff.
To display to the Japanese people that their emperor was not the divine, powerful being they had believed. Germany was divided between America, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union. In 1949, the Allied sectors were united into West Germany. The Second World War had been more terrible and destructive than the first. In its aftermath, two major superpowers with two very different ideologies had come out victorious, and the tension between the two of them would create a new kind of war. A very, very cold one. Wow, Churchill, that looks just like me. And your app is doing really well. And this quesadilla you made is to die for. How'd you learn to do all this stuff?
Okay, I think we know where that is. This is probably their ad. But, yeah. Okay, so that's the end of World War II, and it's for all I got nothing to say about the end of. I got nothing much to say about when reacting to these videos, but it's just strange that um, no, not strange. It's just that, like I was saying, that this would be the is has got the best elements to make a great movie, but we literally have what, hundreds, thousands of World War II movies, and some of them being the best pieces of cinema of all time. Heck, for World War II and for World War One, it's hard to imagine all the stuff that was happening, going on, and such. It's just kind of weird. It feels like you got World War One, then you got World War Two, then the Cold War, and it kind of feels like if this part of history was like a TV show, World War One, World War Two would be like, let's say, the Terminator movies, and then like the first one was good, but the second one was the best one, better than the second one. Look, I'm not saying that this is like the loss of light is tragedy. It's tragic, I know, but just thinking it as like if it was like both an epic and a tragedy, and then when you get to the Cold War, it's kind of like it's kind of like a TV series. My goodness, but actually it makes a lot of sense. Like, you got two good movies. Second one is better than the first, but the first one started it all, and then you got the TV series. And then someone in the comments here will say that actually these wars were the precursor to leading up all this. It would, you know. Okay, for anyone who's still here, watching this, here's something I want you to do. If you have a lot of time on your hands, I mean, this virus we're going through, this lockdown we're going through, there's a lot of there's a lot of time to waste, and I've done a bit of productive stuff here and there with some blinds, and then soon we gotta do the stairs. Jeez. Put down all your favorite World War II movies and stop jotting them down for each timeline, and see if we could find a way to make this giant, huge list of to make all the movies all chronologically ordered. Yes, and let's even include even movies that take place in other countries at the time, and just see if we can make the ultimate World War II universe list. Because honestly, I mean, World War II happened. It's history. It's our history, and you know, the stuff that affected our previous families is what led up to here. I'm saying this shit wrong, aren't I? I'm sorry. I mean, heck, because of World War Two, and to some extent a bit of the Cold War and what was happening in Europe, it kind of led to many European families going to other countries like United States, Australia. Kind of happened with my my grandparents, and the funny thing how we no longer with grandparents no longer with us, kind of just, you know what, I'll save that story for when we get for next time when I react to the Cold War. So that's it for this video. Thank you for watching to the end of the video. Please like and subscribe, it brings a smile to my face. And want to check my other videos? As I already said, that I made a video about the bombing of Darwin and a few other few things that happened during World War II on this channel in Australia. So why not check those videos out? Let's see, you got the bombing of Darwin, you got the Battle of Brisbane, you got the Battle of Milne Bay, and even some weapons that that Australia was making. Sorry, I'm always saying that. Jeez, I'm always saying that it's ours, but it's Australia's history, not my history. It's the nation. So yeah, that's it for the video, and I'll see you guys next week for the Cold War reaction. And I hope by this time I get to finally put a video about the CSA Saber. Jeez, I'm almost done with it. Just gotta make the freaking drawings. And I cut so much shit. Anyway.